So I think we can get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Chandra Frazier. I am one of the supervisors in the grants unit. We're very excited to once again have the opportunity to offer a new round of grant funding. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I welcome you to the Office of Victim Services Bidders Conference. The 2025 Victim of Crime Act Victim Assistance Grant Program request for applications. In short, the 2025 VOCA RFA. Before we get started, I'd like to mention that this presentation is equipped with live CART transcription. There is a CC button at the bottom of your screen. You can click the CC button. It also says show captions. Can you, next slide, please. And one more, thank you. Our objective today is for you to feel more confident when completing the RFA application. We will highlight some key points and we will guide you through the process. Next slide. So today's panelists are Melinda Williams, Deputy Director of Operations and Program Development, Victoria Melillo, Associate Deputy Director of Operations, Kathy Jocelyn, Grant Unit Chief, and Chandra Frazier, Contract Management Specialist 2. Next slide. And we're going to get into some housekeeping items. Next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. If we go back one. And so on today's agenda, got ahead of myself. Today's agenda will include program overview, forms overview, SFS technical assistance, and a question and answer session. Next slide, please. Now we're going to get into some housekeeping items. So we are currently in the restricted period. This began when the RFA was released and will end when the contract is awarded. This period is to ensure that the RFA process is fair and equitable. Also, as previously mentioned, we will be using this presentation is equipped with CART transcriptions. This again can be accessed at the bottom of your screen labeled CC. You can just click on that button. And so that you can access this information at a later date, this presentation and associated slides will be recorded and made available on the OVS website. Next slide. So our question and answer session, when you get the question and answer portion of the presentation, we will review some previously submitted questions and accept a limited number of questions via the chat feature. As you may have noticed, the chat feature is not currently enabled. However, it will become active at the start of the question and answer. Next slide. Sorry, we're there. So today's question and answer policy, I'm going to take a moment to read that for you now. Today's verbal answers are not binding. In the event of any inconsistency between the PowerPoint presentation and the solicitation and the attachments posted to the OVS 2025 RFA website shall supersede information in this presentation. Only the written responses published after today's conference will be official, binding responses of the state. Final binding answers to all questions will be posted by the end of the day on February 26th, 2025 on the OVS website. Next slide. And I will pass this to Victoria.
Thanks, Chandra. Hi, everyone. I'm Victoria Malillo. I'll be providing an overview of the RFA. This solicitation is issued by the New York State Office of Victim Services for the purposes of awarding Victims of Crime Act, known as VOCA, Victim Assistance Grant Program funding to entities providing direct services and assistance to victims of crime. The awards will be provided for a 3-year contract term beginning October 1st, 2025, and concluding on September 30th, 2028. There's going to be $126.5 million in funding available per year for a total of $379.5 million over the 3-year period. Next slide, please. This slide here is just to highlight some key dates associated with the 2025 RFA. February 7th is the deadline for submission of questions. And again, questions posed during the Q&A section of this pre-bid conference will be collected and responses will be published on the OVS website. Those responses will become available Wednesday, February 6th. The application is due Wednesday, March 19th at 5 p.m. And we anticipate notifying applicants of awards on Monday, June 30th, 2025. And the contract start date will again be October 1st, 2025. Next slide, please. Questions related to information and requirements described in this RFA must be submitted via email by end of day Friday, February 7th, 2025 to our OVS RFA grants email, which is here on the screen. All questions received about this RFA will be published and distributed no later than end of business day on Wednesday, February 26th, 2025 p.m. And one more time, this includes any questions posed today during the Q&A session. Next slide, please. We'll be going through just some highlights of this year's RFA. Next slide, please. So this RFA includes $2 million of funding set aside for tribal applicants, including federal or state recognized tribal nations, indigenous coalitions, and indigenous organizations. Any unused funds from the set aside will be eligible for awards to other qualified applicants. We'll also be allowing advances. Programs can request 25% of their awarded annual allocation upfront each year. Funding will be quarterly reimbursement based, but programs can now request an advance if they need it. And OVS hopes that this will help alleviate some of the cash flow constraints programs face. Next slide, please. This solicitation is limited to victim service providers. Programs can be new or existing, operated by either a unit of local government or a not-for-profit organization. There are also going to be some priority categories in this RFA. VOCA guidelines require that New York State allocates at least 10% of each federal VOCA victim assistance grant award to each of the 4 priority categories, which include domestic violence, sexual assault, child abuse, and serving underserved victims of crime. These percentages refer to overall funding and not each individual grant. And under this RFA, we will also seek to address New York State priority categories by including the option to weight scores by percentage of gun violence related services provided to ensure that New York is meeting the requirements of the Community Violence Intervention Act and providing sufficient coverage across the state. Next slide, please. Under VOCA requirements, organizations funded through this RFA must demonstrate that services are provided at no charge to all victims of crime that present for services, that current use of volunteers or the organization is actively seeking volunteers, and that substantial financial support from other sources other than the Crime Victims Fund. Next slide, please. Applications must be submitted and completed in the statewide financial system, also known as SFS, by 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, March 19th, 2025. The application will include informational questions about your organization, as well as a prompt to enter each of the required forms, which we'll go through a little bit in the upcoming slides. Please note that incomplete or late submissions will not be accepted, so we recommend getting started on them as soon as you can. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Kathy, who will discuss some of the forms that are required for the RFA.
Hello, yes. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to go over some of our forms. So on the screen, you'll see some of our required forms. So they include the narrative submission, annual anticipated services, annual funding, position description, program information, priority categories, budget worksheets, and the county cert form. We're going to go over a couple of these forms later on, but these are all of the required forms with the application, and they can be found on the RFA page of the OVS website. The one form called the application submission checklist is a form that can be used to ensure that you've included all the required documents, but it's not required to submit with your application. That's just a tool for you to use. And as I said, all of the required form templates are on the RFA website, which you can get to with this link when we share the slides later on. You can go to the next slide. So it's important to notice that in SFS, there are some file types that are more compatible than others. So we have listed out a couple of the extremely compatible file types for SFS, and that is Excel, Word, and flat PDFs. We do have a couple fillable PDFs with this RFA. You will have to turn them into flat PDFs, and we do have a guideline on how to do that in our resources section at the end of the slideshow. Next slide. So the narrative submission form is going to be used for your evaluation of your application. This is where you will answer all of the questions, including the problem statement, organizational capacity, proposed services, implementation, and program evaluation. We also included on this form time or space for additional budget narrative information beyond what the limits of SFS allow for. So we did develop this form because SFS does have character limits. So we have made this form so we can allow for more characters for each submission. So for longer multiple page answers, the character limit does apply across multiple pages, as we can show you in the next slide. So for a couple of the questions, you'll have a 5,000 character limit. Each box for this answer will allow for 2,500 characters. You'll have to stop at the 2,500 and then restart in the new box. So total, it'll be 5,000, but you will have to recognize that it has to be in those two separate boxes. We do recommend that you complete your answers in a Word document first, so you can determine, the character amount before you put it into the final document. And this is the one that's important. It is a fillable PDF. So you will have to download it and open it so that you can use it as a fillable. And then when you're saving it, you're going to want to save it as a flat PDF, which we do have a slide on later on. Okay, next slide. Thank you. So this is the budget worksheet, which has been combined. We used to have fringe and prorating separate, but now they are combined on a budget worksheet. So this one is a little bit more complicated than some of our other forms. So we do have a lot of instructions here to help you. We ask that you read carefully tab A because it has all the instructions and information that you'll need. And then you do have to complete tab C, tab D, E, and F based on what cost your budget will have. So if you have fringe costs, you need to do tab C. If you have non-personal service costs, you will need to do D, E, and F. Next slide. Okay, on tab D, we do have a couple of different prorating methods, methods 1 through 3. And if you'll notice on this slide, we have a red circle over a drop-down arrow. It's important that you find that little drop-down spot so that you can pick the budget method that you are using. Now, don't worry, these slides will be sent out after the webinar, so you'll have this to reference back. But we wanted to point out that there is a very small arrow that you would have to click on to get that drop-down method. And that'll give you the 3 established prorating options. And then on tab F, you can choose your own prorating method. And in that method, you would explain the method that your agency uses. And OVS during the negotiations will review that method, determine if it's one that is suitable, and we can allow you to use. But we are opening it up for three of the methods that are common, and then the ability to explain your own method. Okay, next page. Okay, SFS. As we all know, this bid opportunity is located in SFS. So there are a lot of different things with SFS that we are not used to yet. So we're going to give you a couple of tips to get you going in SFS. So as I said, all applications need to be submitted through SFS. The first thing that your agencies are going to want to do, if you have not already done, is make sure you're pre-qualified. Pre-qualification is required for all not-for-profits. So if you haven't done this, please start this as soon as possible, because as our tip says, it does take a little bit of back and forth in some cases. So it could be a longer process than anticipated. So through pre-qualification, the state can deem that a nonprofit is qualified to apply for a bid opportunity. So if you're not qualified, if you have not done the pre-qualification prior to the RFA due date, you will be unable to submit an application. It does not allow you to hit the submit button if you are not pre-qualified. So it's very important that you follow this screen and go through the whole process of pre-qualification. This is all maintained and done yearly through the SFS system. So you can click on the New York State Grants Management site link and find all of the information to do this process. Okay, next slide. As you navigate in SFS, the first place that you want to go is in the vendor portal. You're going to want to search for a bid event. So you can search and view as a public member. You don't have to be signed into SFS. You can go through the SFS public portal homepage and select search for grant opportunities. Once you do that, you are required to have an SFS login to actually submit an application. And you can access all of this information on the Grants Management website on how to register your organization and obtain a login if you don't have one already. Next page. So once you have a login, you're going to want to sign into the SFS vendor portal. And then there's a lot of clicking that goes on in SFS. So you're going to have to click in a lot of different places. Once you're in there for a while, you will get used to it and it'll become easier. But the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to click on the tile that says Grant Management State, and that's highlighted in green here. And then you're going to want to go to the bid event search, and that's where you will find the bid. Now, the slides, you'll have all these to reference back, so don't worry about all the different things you have to click on. You'll be able to look at this. But next page. All right, once you've gone into the bid event, once you've clicked on the bid event, you're going to be able to search for bid opportunities. So we found that the best way to search for OVS's opportunity is to enter OVS 01 in the search by agency funding box. Since we only have one out there, once you do this search and populate it, the event ID that comes up will be the one that you want. So then you're going to want to click on the event ID. Go to the next page. And like I said, SFS involves a lot of clicking on a lot of different areas. So once you get in here, you're going to want to click on Bid on Event. So on this screen, you'll find all the information about the bid event. And when you're ready to bid, you're going to click on Bid Event, and then it's going to bring you to the next page. Next slide. And on this page, it's going to have all of the event details. So it's very important that you scroll all the way to the bottom of the page to see all of the details. But it'll give you the additional bid information, the event start date, end date, our estimated award date, just all of the information that you need to know. So make sure you scroll down on this screen. Okay, next one. So this is another important screen that we decided to highlight because it's a little bit different. To enter your budget, so to enter your budget, you would want to go into period details. And then once you click on period details, you're going to go to budget properties. Now, these screenshots are just generic. They're not tied to our RFA, anything like that. These slides, screenshots can all be found in the SFS vendor manual. So that's where we got all these screenshots. They're very generic. They're just leading you to what SFS can show us from the program side. So you're going to click on period details and then budget properties. And this is where you're going to click and enter all of your budget information for year one of your contract. So this is an important page for you guys to remember. So next slide. Okay, so once you establish your entity in SFS, you will have to delegate an SFS delegated administrator. This person is the person that will be able to assign all of the multiple roles that your program will need in SFS. So we didn't highlight all of the roles, but two of the most important roles for this bid event are the bid response initiator. So this is someone that can initiate a response and work on the response. And then you're going to need a bid response submitter. This is the role that allows the bid to be submitted to our agency. So if you do not know who these people are in your agency, or you do not know who your delegated administrator is, you can reach out to the help desk and they'll be able to help you through that process. But every agency will have to have that delegated administrator, and you'll be able to assign all of the roles that are necessary. All of the necessary roles can be found on the grants management site or in the vendor handbook, which you'll have links to down in our resources. Okay, next page. So now in a couple minutes, we're gonna start our Q&A session, but I believe that our director might want to come on and speak for a little bit. If she is ready.
I'm here.
Okay.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks everybody for being here. We've got like, I don't know, almost 600 people here. So, so just shows all the interest that we have. I'm Bea Hansen. I'm the director at the Office of Victim Services. I've been here since June, and just happy to be here, and met many of you in your programs and some of the conferences that we've held, and we're having another one in August. So hopefully I'll get to meet all of you. Just super happy about this solicitation. Hopefully, with the information that Kathy and Melinda and others have given you, it doesn't feel overwhelming, and with the handouts that you get afterwards, I hope that it's helpful. But please know that we're here to help for all of you who are applying. So we're giving out almost $380 million for this solicitation. It's the largest one we've ever had. And we know it's not going to meet all of the needs of all crime victim services, but we really hope that this increase will help. And I think people are concerned about the new federal administration and any reductions, and due to your advocacy and the work of the governor, we have up to $100 million every year in the budget to make sure that we don't see any decreases in the VOCA funding. So so super excited about that. And just the last thing I wanted to mention is that for the first time, we're setting aside $2 million in this RFA to support indigenous nations, as well as indigenous communities across the state. So we're really excited about that. So happy that all of you are here. We're here to support you through this whole process, and thank you mostly for everything that you do every day to help victims and survivors heal and feel whole. So thanks again, and hopefully I will get to meet you all if I haven't met you already. So I will pass. I think we're on to Q&A now, so I'll pass it back to whoever's handling that.
Great, thank you, Bea. Lauren, if we could get the slides back up, and I will be covering the Q&A session. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. Could we go to the next slide, please? Okay, so just as a reminder again, we will be addressing some previously submitted questions now, and we will also be turning on the chat feature. So chat will be visible to host and panelists, and where possible, we will be addressing some questions live. Given the nature and complexity of some questions, we will not be able to answer everything live. And so that should now be active. They're working on that now. If you could go to the next slide, please. Okay, and just as another reminder, we covered this earlier, but it is important for repeating. So answers today are not binding. We will be taking everything back. So any questions answered verbally today, also any questions that we don't get to today, we'll be taking back and adding into our written Q&A response, which will be released by the end of the day on February 26, 2025. And that is our final binding record of responses. So please stay tuned for that. If we don't get to your question today, it will be addressed in that document. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we'll start with some of our questions that were received in advance, and Kathy will be reading the questions and I will be providing the answers.
Okay, first question. Can municipalities apply for funding, or are they considered a New York State governmental agency?
The answer is yes, municipal entities can apply for funding under this RFA. The term New York State governmental agency for ineligible entities is only meant to apply to New York State executive level agencies, for example, the New York State Division of Criminal Justice Services.
Can you clarify whether your unit bid price under the line section of the SFS application should be for 1 year of grant funding or for the full 3-year grant cycle?
It should be for 1 year of funding. So when you're entering your budget information, you are entering for 1 year. Okay, next slide.
Is the VOCA application completed fully again, or is there a reapplication process required instead of the application sent out for this year by VOCA?
Every applicant, whether you're a potential new applicant or an existing grantee, must complete the full application to receive funding for the 3-year period beginning 10/1/2025 and ending 9/30/2028. So everybody needs to fill out the same full application.
Next, oh wait, no, we're still on this one. If we are a current VOCA awardee, will past PMT data performance be factored into our evaluation?
No, historical data is not factored into the evaluation process for this RFA. Okay, next slide.
Okay, where and how should we demonstrate the required use of volunteers?
So for this question, there will be a specific part in SFS that asks this question. It's a yes, no, that could demonstrate compliance with this requirement. And that's all that's required for that one.
Okay, regarding the federal VOCA funding priority categories, is an agency required to include all of the categories, or can it choose from the provided options based on its expertise and mission?
No, you are not required to include all categories. Your reported priority category should be based on your anticipated services. And just to add to this one, as Victoria mentioned earlier in the presentation, we view the priority categories against our overall funding. It is not specific to an individual grant. Okay, next slide. Okay, so that is it for the questions received in advance that we're answering today. So we will go through some of the live submissions now. Bear with us. We'll see if there's a few that we can answer. We did receive. Oh, go ahead, Kathy. Yeah.
Sorry, I just want to remind everybody that the Q&A function is off. We are only using the chat. So if you have a question, put it in the chat. One of our questions that we received is, when will this recording and presentation be made available or published on the OVS website?
We should have this available to you within this week. I think it'll likely be within the next couple of days. And we will send out an announcement broadcast email when that is available. So you can check back on the website, but also stay tuned for an announcement. If you are not already on our listserv, we can also add information in the chat about how to sign up for our listserv for future updates as well.
Okay, what is the maximum individual grant allotted to each vendor?
This RFA does not have a maximum on the potential grant award.
Okay. In SFS, will applicants be required to complete the work plan?
No, we have the work plan feature turned off in this RFA in SFS. So information on your proposed services is to be included in the narrative submission form. There is no additional work plan required in SFS.
Okay. How does the RFA process work differently for New York State agencies?
So as previously mentioned, New York State agencies, specifically executive level state agencies, are not eligible to apply in this RFA. If there are questions about funding for New York State agencies, please reach out to us separately and we can have a conversation about that. But currently this is not, this RFA is not open for New York State executive level agencies.
Okay. Will the award amount be the same for each of the 3 years of the award?
Yes, awards will be awarded at a flat value for each of the 3 years awarded.
So it was indicated that the budget is for year 1, not the entire 3-year request, correct?
Yes, that is correct, and that may be confusing in SFS, but when you are entering your budget details in SFS, you are entering for a 1-year value.
Okay, can the bid response initiator be the same person as the bid response submitter?
I believe the answer is yes, but I want Kathy to confirm that too, because Kathy is my SFS expert.
I believe as well that the answer is yes. The best thing to do is reach out to the SFS help desk to determine that, because those are not roles that we work with. So I would reach out to the SFS help desk to make sure. Okay, another question. Are spaces included in the character count?
Yes, spaces are included in the character count. And I know Kathy mentioned earlier that it would be a good idea to prepare answers in Word first if you can, so that it's easier to identify how far along you are in the character count. The fillable PDF will also, it'll cut you off. It won't let you go past it. So if you are typing in the fillable PDF and it stops, that is because you have reached the character limit.
Okay. If anything is missing from an application, will we receive a notice, providing it's submitted early, or is it immediately dismissed?
So the way the application process works in SFS, there is a required question that will prompt you to upload each required form. So you will not be able to submit unless you have attached all of the required forms. OVS does reserve the right to follow up with grantees for any clarification or additional information if needed for the evaluation of your application. The system will prompt you for all of the required documents.
Okay, if you already have an OVS contract, are you considered pre-qualified?
No, the pre-qualification process is separate and must be renewed annually in SFS. And we definitely encourage entities to check on their status and, if necessary, submit all required documentation for that as soon as possible. That process can take time for OVS review, and you will be unable to submit in SFS if you are not actively pre-qualified.
Actually, we had another question about pre-qualification, and it is pre-qualified an annual event? If we have previously pre-qualified, do we have to do this again? Yes, pre-qualification is done every year through the SFS system. Sorry for answering, Melinda.
Nope, that's great. Thank you.
Okay. You mentioned extra boxes. Are those extra boxes for all narrative questions?
So each of the narrative questions in the narrative submission form will have a noted character limit right after the question. So many of them are just 1 page or half a page. Those that are multiple pages, it is noted. So in the example we showed earlier, it was 5,000 characters over 2 pages, and you will see 2 full pages of boxes available for you to use. So I recommend downloading that form, looking through it. We've tried to, as clearly as possible, note the character limits and the pages. The key point there is just that the answers don't automatically scroll between pages. You'll need to do 1 page, then move to the second page and enter there as well to take advantage of the full character limit.
Okay. How much weight is given to the fact that an agency was a past recipient?
Past funding and past performance data is not factored into this RFA evaluation at all.
Okay, this one's about funding. Is the New York State allocation to OVS guaranteed, or does it need to be approved every year? Just wondering if we need to continue to advocate for its approval every year, or if it's already set for this RFA.
Sure. We have state funding available for this RFA. There is an annual appropriation process. However, we have a state commitment to keep our funding stable for this RFA.
Okay. If requesting a match waiver, when is that submission due by?
We don't currently have a final due date for individual match waivers. OVS for the past few years has been operating under a blanket match waiver for all grantees, and that currently carries through our existing grants, and we will be evaluating that in the coming months for the next grant cycle. In the event that the blanket match waiver is not continued, we will share more information at a later date about the timeline and process for submitting individual match waiver requests.
I'm gonna follow up with another match question. Can the match requirement be satisfied by fringe? Do you want me to take that one? Okay. So match can be satisfied by any VOCA allowable expense. So that does include fringe. The main component is that it's VOCA allowable. Okay. Does the requirement that applicants demonstrate the use of volunteers require that volunteers are used to provide VOCA allowable activities, direct services, or other VOCA allowable? Do you want me?
I believe the answer is yes.
So It's a little more complicated. So you do have to show that your agency has volunteers. You don't always necessarily have to use the volunteers for direct service. But through the contract negotiation process, we can clearly more define that for you. But as long as your agency involves including volunteers, that requirement is satisfied. Okay. How can we check our pre-qualification status? I believe our pre-qualification is active, but I want to confirm. You would reach out to the SFS help desk and they would be able to confirm your active pre-qualification and what your date for renewal would be. That would be the best place to go. Okay, 1 second. Sorry, we're getting a lot of questions. I think we answered this one already, but we can do this one again. What is the maximum individual grant allotted to each vendor?
There is no maximum specified in this RFA.
I'm having a little trouble. There we go. My mouse didn't want to highlight that one. Okay. Among other things, we would like to propose to use our VOCA funds to enhance salaries for some staff in our existing New York City funded DV shelters. Is that an allowable use of funds? Yes. You're muted, Melinda. Sorry.
Sorry. I was going to say some of the VOCA allowability type questions we may also want to take back and include in our written response because there can be some nuance to those details.
Is it possible to request an increase of the budget based on the increased need and growth of individuals served?
So I would say for this question, you should request the budget that you believe is needed to provide your proposed services. We don't consider past awards, we don't consider past performance or usage of funds. It should be based on your anticipated services for the 3-year period that is subject to this RFA.
Will interns be counted under volunteer hours? Yes, as long as they are unpaid interns, they can be counted as volunteers. Okay, another match question. Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions and then we'll be wrapping it up. Are we showing match for year 1 or years 2 through 3?
So the submission in SFS, similar to how the budget is just for a 1-year value, you're also demonstrating match for that same 1-year period. However, there may be a requirement to demonstrate match throughout the entire grant award. So that should be something that an organization is able to support.
For a HVIP, are separate applications required for funding request? For example, 10% of funding is directed towards gun violence, 10% of the funding is directed towards domestic violence.
No, separate applications are not required. You can combine multiple proposed services and programs within the same application.
Oh, sorry, 1 second. Will we submit 1-year documents, but we'll need to submit additional pages for year 2 or 3 as an attachment?
So in terms of the application, you are submitting a budget for just 1 year, as well as all of the required forms and narrative information. Additional documents will be required if awarded a grant as part of the annual contract negotiation process. But they are not required to be submitted as part of the application.
I'm going to take one more question. I'm just trying to find. Heavy on the match questions, but I think it's important that we touch on this a lot. But when we submit our initial application, should we assume that match will be required and fill out the application accordingly?
Yes, application should be submitted at this time with match included, as that is a requirement of VOCA. However, we are still evaluating the possibility of extending our match waiver for additional years. More information will be provided about that at a later date.
I'm going to take one last question and then we'll wrap it up here. Is there a list of VOCA allowable budget items? I don't see it in the RFA.
So in the RFA, we have an appendix with some information on common allowable VOCA items. We also have a few links in the RFA to the VOCA rule, VOCApedia, which is a great resource for looking up allowability. We also have an appendix in this presentation with those same links. So we encourage everybody to take advantage of those, look through and get familiar with what may or may not be VOCA allowable prior to submitting your application.
So I think that's it for questions, but we did just want to remind everybody that all of the submitted questions through the chat feature will be addressed and published on our written response publishing on February 25th. I think I got that date right. But every question that was asked today will be officially answered and published on that date. So if you didn't get to your question, it will be addressed and published.
Great, thank you, Kathy. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, we wanted to go through a few resources, and we'll go through these slides kind of quickly, but they will be available after this when all the information from today's webinar is posted. Okay, and we have turned off the chat now just in case anyone is still trying, just for awareness. If you have additional questions, please send them to us at ovsgrantsrfa@ovs.ny.gov. Which is kind of in the middle of the slide here. And we're also repeating the SFS help desk information. They are a great resource if you're having technical issues with your application or your login or any of those systems related issues. We really encourage you to start early and to reach out to them early if you have any problems, because there's only a few staff there answering all the questions, and there will probably be a rush of things at the end. So the sooner you get your questions in, the quicker you can get things resolved and submit an application. Also, the designated contacts for this RFA are Kathleen Joslin and Victoria Melillo, who spoke earlier, and their contact information is also on the slide. Next slide, please. Okay, we have a few SFS resources linked here. This includes the link to the vendor portal where you can access everything in SFS, as well as SFS vendor handbook, which includes those screenshots that we showed earlier, as well as a lot of other information about accessing and using SFS as a vendor. We have a couple of shorter documents linked here as well, troubleshooting tips for using SFS and submitting an application, and then also some additional detail about submitting attachments. So if you're having problems uploading an attachment, take a look at that document. It may have some common issues and tips for you to troubleshoot there. Next slide, please. These are the VOCA resources that I mentioned. The first link is just to all the materials for this RFA on our website. The next two links are VOCA information, specifically the federal VOCA rule, and also VOCApedia, which is kind of a searchable resource, lots of plain language answers on things that are or are not allowable under VOCA. And I do want to clarify here as well, we will be holding awards made under this RFA to VOCA requirements. So those allowability requirements and information on VOCA are very important to guide your submission. And then lastly, we have a link here for some information from our Victims of Crime Needs Assessment, VOCNA project, which has some information on gaps in services and some crime data and things that may be helpful as you're thinking about demonstrating the need for services in your area. You may want to reference this information. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, and then we'll just go through a couple items here on the appendix. As Kathy mentioned earlier, we have a couple screenshots here guiding on how to save a PDF as a flat PDF. We were able in testing to attach the fillable PDFs. However, if there are issues, we really recommend doing the flat PDF just to avoid any upload issues. That is the recommended method by SFS. So we can go through these couple of slides, and if needed, please refer back to these. Okay, next couple of slides. You can keep going. And then lastly, we have a glossary here. This mirrors the glossary in the RFA itself, but if you are unclear about any of the terms used today, I know in particular some of the SFS terms bid event and things like that may not be really intuitive, please refer to this glossary here or in the RFA. And if you have any questions, please send them to us. Okay, and I think I'll go through these couple slides. Okay, so that concludes the presentation today. A few really key takeaways. Please make sure start your application early, troubleshoot technical issues, reach out to SFS if you need to. Please ensure your pre-qualification is up to date. That can take time to get approved, so we really encourage you to not wait till the last minute on that, as that may prevent you from submitting. And please be mindful of the dates and the contact information in the RFA. Applications are due by 5 p.m. on March 19th. We don't have flexibility to accept late applicants, so that is a really hard cutoff. And I think that concludes our presentation today. Please stay tuned for the materials to be shared on this. And we really thank everybody for your participation and for joining us today, and we look forward to working with you. Thank you, everyone.